Covert narcissism. Have you heard of it? Do you have any idea what it is? You've probably heard of classic narcissism, but this one's different. Hi, my name is Michele Paradise, and welcome back, or welcome to my channel, where I take evidence-based knowledge and information coupled with my own personal experiences to help you navigate the most challenging relationships in your life, especially the one with yourself. So let's get started and let's take a deep dive into covert narcissism. It's a less obvious but equally harming form of narcissism. Covert narcissism is the type of narcissism that hides behind the facade of vulnerability, victimhood, and making it really difficult to identify. I always had a difficult time with this one, and I ended up being married to a covert narcissist. More about that later, perhaps. And I found this really under the radar. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to unpack it with you to help you notice and recognize some of the telltale signs of it. And we'll use some real life examples, changing the names to protect the innocent. What is covert narcissism? Unlike classic narcissism, which is loud and obnoxious, and the person can be delusional and entitled and very charismatic. This is quite different. Now, the covert narcissist still has the sense of superiority and entitlement, but it's masked by a facade of humility, vulnerability, and victimhood. So let's break it down a little bit further. Covert narcissists frequently appear to be shy, modest, super sensitive. Now, if you know somebody like that, that doesn't mean that they're a covert narcissist, because there's lots of other things that are involved in this. They might present themselves as the underdog or the victim in various situations. However, underneath this exterior lies the traits, the sense of entitlement, a need for admiration, and most importantly, they lack empathy. So none of that changes. It's very similar to the classic narcissist, as all types of narcissism are, like malignant narcissism and community narcissists. They all have those baseline ones: lack of empathy, sense of entitlement, sense of superiority. But this one is hard to spot and frequently just hides that little bit under the radar. So while classic narcissists, as I've said, are easy to spot, they're boastful and they're domineering, covert narcissists are more insidious. They might say things like, "I'm just not as talented as everyone else." Now, you can see by that garners them more attention. Like, a lot of people around them might say, "Oh, but you are, you just haven't had the opportunity, you haven't had the breaks," whatever. So they're really they have their suppliers, just like every other narcissist. Narcissist is in the middle and all the suppliers are around it. So they're still getting their supply needs met. They're just doing it in a different way. So by saying, "I'm just not as talented as everyone else," they're fishing for reassurance and compliments and validation. So let's look for some key signs to identify a covert narcissist. Excessive sensitivity is one of them. Covert narcissists may react strongly to any form of criticism, often taking it as a personal attack. So I want you to let that one sink in for a moment. Think about people in your life that they maybe can dish it out, but they can't take it. And they really take any type of criticism, the smallest amount, very, very personally. False humility. They often downplay their achievements, but in a way that seeks reassurance and praise from others. "I'm just not as good as you are, and you did so much better than I did." And then they have the supply wheel comes back, and the suppliers on it start saying things like, "Well, yes, you are. You're brilliant. Remember that time you did this, and remember when you wrote that book, and how many books you sold," things like that. But they really downplay their achievements. Chronic victimhood is a big one. They frequently position themselves as victims of circumstances and other people's actions. They may say things like, "Well, if I had had the education that he had, I would be as successful as he is. If I had had the wealthy family that she had, of course I would have been able to go to university and have a good job. But," or if only they knew how smart I was, but no one really knows that. They just don't realize how, and that's the other side of it, how talented I am, how smart I am. Then there's the passive aggressive behavior. So instead of direct confrontation, they might use subtle digs or underhanded comments to express their displeasure. And, they can be things, think of some passive aggressive statements that you've heard in your life with maybe family members or relationships, and platonic, romantic, where they give you the compliment on the one hand, but then they take it away in the next hand. And you kind of feel a bit, confused. It's a real cognitive dissonance there. Envy and resentment are really big. And I mentioned that just a minute ago about, if I had what they had, I would be very successful. So despite their outward humility, they often feel envious of others and resentful about not getting the recognition they believe that they deserve. So, for example, they might say, let's say somebody just wrote a book in their circle and it's doing really well. They might say, well, I've written 5 books. No one seems to notice that. No one seems to know that, I've written 5 books, and just because she's written 1 book, you're all getting excited. That's a passive aggressive statement there. That's also letting people know that you have not given them the recognition that they deserve. So these signs can help you recognize covert narcissism, but let's look at some examples to see how this behavior plays out in real life situations. So I'm going to give you an example of a covert narcissist in a workplace. Okay, so imagine you have this colleague named Sarah that she's always the victim in the situation. She'll say things like, I guess I'm just not as good as everyone else when she doesn't get the project that she wanted. However, Sarah also subtly undermines her colleagues by making passive aggressive comments like, I'm sure you'll do a great job on that project. You always get the good ones. Great passive aggressive comment there. And it could be said with different tonality. I'm sure you'll do a great job on that project because you always get the good ones, right? So they're not always aggressive. They can be very sweet, will appear to be very sweet as they stab you in the back. This behavior seems to elicit sympathy while also sowing discord and envy. So you can see the person on the other side of that is like their head is, that's cognitive dissonance of, did they mean that? Did they not mean that? What were they saying there? I'll give you another example in a romantic relationship, okay? So Alex's partner, Jamie, always talks about how they feel unappreciated and misunderstood. Jamie might say something like, I do so much for you, but it seems like it's never enough. Now, this creates a sense of guilt in Alex. So Jamie's covert narcissism manifests in playing the victim to gain control and sympathy while also expecting constant reassurance and validation from Alex. Let's look at this dynamic, this covert narcissism in a family. What does that look like? So imagine a parent, we'll call her Fiona. Fiona is constantly talking about her sacrifices and how ungrateful her children are. Fiona might say things like, I've given up everything for these kids. And this is how you repay me? Or I've given up everything for you. And this is how you repay me? I'm sure you've heard that one in your life from somebody. So Fiona's covert narcissism is evident in the way that she positions herself as this long-suffering martyr, expecting her children to constantly express gratitude and admiration. And us parents know that it doesn't usually work like that. So the impact of covert narcissism can be profound. Victims often feel confused and drained as the narcissist's behavior is manipulative and emotionally exhausting. They may feel guilty, constantly second-guessing themselves, and struggle to understand why they feel so emotionally burdened. So it's important to recognize these patterns so you can protect your mental health and to set boundaries. So I'm going to give you some tips for setting some boundaries and having some strategies for dealing with the covert narcissists. So I'll itemize a few of these and unpack them. So the first one is called setting emotional guardrails. I want you to visualize your personal space and define the emotional boundaries that no one is allowed to cross. Because if you don't have those guardrails in place, nothing will change. So it has to start with you. All right. I'm not asking you to go in and set hard boundaries yet. I'm just asking you to visualize your boundaries so that they become muscle memory for you. The next one you can do is a reality anchor, I call it. I want you to create a journal of voice notes that capture your experiences and feelings to remind yourself what's real. Because what frequently happens is something happens in the moment and we don't journal it, we don't save it in any way. And then we get gaslit again or love bombed or whatever, and we go back in thinking that everything's okay. And we forget about that. So I want you to have really specific, write it down, do voice messages, whatever, keep it in a file somewhere so that you know what's real and what's imagined, because they're going to try to convince you that a lot of this stuff never happened. This one I love is this is called a strategic retreat. Plan activities and breaks to reduce contact with the narcissist and protect your energy. Joyful armor. Engage in hobbies and pastimes that you're passionate about, that bring you joy, that reinforce your sense of self-worth without the narcissist being involved. This is your time and only your time. So as I said, I later found out many years after my divorce that my husband was actually a narcissist. He was a covert narcissist, very difficult to identify. He didn't really have the hallmarks of grandiosity and life of the party or anything like that. He was the person that would stand in the corner at a party and hardly speak to anybody. And you wouldn't have noticed it at first, but he had all of the hallmarks that I've talked about. He was always the victim. Everything was against him. He felt like all of his achievements went unnoticed, and on and on. I'm not really going to go much deeper into it than that, but it was very, very hard for me to recognize. So go easy on yourself. If you have to listen to this more than once, or if it's not for you, share it with somebody that really could use it. Thank you very much for following me on this video today. I'm going to put some books and links to the books that will help you in the text afterwards. Please subscribe. As always, hit that subscribe button. And all it remains for me to say is stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.